Today's episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast is brought to you by Baylor Scott & White Sports Performance Center, athletes made here. The Sports Performance Center was developed with one goal in mind: to maximize human performance through movement and recovery. Their team of expert performance sports coaches and trainers will guide you to achieve your performance goals. That's the Baylor Scott & White Sports Performance Center, located at the Star in Frisco. This episode is also brought to you by Allen Dental Studio. Located off Bethany Drive in Allen, their office was designed with you, the patient, in mind, which means an excellent and enjoyable experience. From cosmetics to implants, you deserve a perfect smile, and Allen Dental Studio can make that happen. Also, don't want to leave out another longtime friend of the podcast, Texan Senior Residential Care Homes. With locations in Carrollton and Dallas, Texan Senior Residential Care Homes offers an affordable, high-quality alternative to senior living. Call now at 469-400-7650. That's Texan, spelled T-E-X-S-E-N, Texan Senior Residential Care Homes. Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, sports editor at Star Local Media, being joined by Devin Hasson. Devin, week 9 of high school football season is upon us, and as per usual, that means we get to break down another game of the week. Big thanks to everybody who went to our website, starlocalmedia.com, to vote on this week's poll. And the winner, we have it was a nice comeback effort from our winner this week, because for a while there early in the season, we were wondering, dude, what's going on at Sachse?
Yeah.
It used to just be death, taxes, and Sachse winning the game of the week poll by 1 million votes. Mustangs were a little bit slow out of the gates, even though they were up for consideration, earlier in the season. But yes, Devin, apparently you've woken up the masses out at Sachse, and they have responded in kind, as Sachse has a massive turnout in show of its game Thursday night out at, let's see, where is this game at actually? I completely don't have it written down. Which venue is it at, Devin?
At Williams Stadium.
Williams Stadium out in Garland, 7 o'clock, a kickoff between Sachse and Lakeview Centennial. We're finally going to get a little bit of clarity on what has been an increasingly difficult district out in 10-6A to figure out. Sachse and Lakeview part of a 4-way tie for first place. That's all you need to know about how convoluted that district race has been. They are both 5-2 overall in the season, 3-1 in district play, tied with Wiley and Rowlett. We'll figure out, I guess, maybe as far as what this game could mean as far as who potentially is the front runner for the district title. For the past few years, that's been a mantle that Sachse has carried quite proudly in making fairly short work of the rest of its district competition. They've met a ton of resistance this year, far more than they're accustomed to. So we can talk a little bit about Sachse in the first half of this matchup, because with the Mustangs, it's a program that's been among the better ones in the area in recent years, and there's some impressive performances on that record and whatnot. 5-2, still pretty solid for 7 games into the season, but it's definitely a different vibe in 10-6A relative to the usual ease in which Sachse is dispatching competition. So what has been your read on where Sachse is at right now, heading into a game that is, to this point at least, the biggest one of their season?
Well, and like you say, Sachse is still 5-2. They're still 3-1. They're still having a very good season. Yeah. It's just they've been so dominant, particularly in 10-6A in the last 3 years. The last 3 years they went undefeated in district, and rarely were they really challenged. They had a couple, the thriller against Rowlett a couple of years ago where they had to come back in the fourth quarter. But even in a lot of those games where they were close, you always got the impression Sachse was the better team and would find a way to win. This year, from day one, they've been living dangerously. They have four games decided by 3 points or less. Yes. They started in non-district with the 33-30 win over Coppell, 21-19 loss the following week to Euless Trinity, and that carried over to district. They dropped their first game since 2015 to Wiley, 22-21 in the opener. And then last week against North Garland, another back and forth game that they were able to hold on to win 24-21. So, it hasn't quite been the same dominance, but they're still in control of their own destiny, and that's all you can ask for. One thing Sachse's been known for the last several years is having one of the most prolific offenses, wide open, averaging 50 points a game. They just don't have that this year. They're doing different things. Last year they started off with a quarterback rotation before settling in on Derek Rose. They really haven't had that one guy emerge as the go-to guy this year. And I think, Coach, talking to Coach Behrens a couple weeks ago, he kind of likes it that way. They have Parker Wells, who's more of a thrower, although he did rush for the game-winning touchdown a week ago, whereas Xavier Foreman can throw the ball. But he's also a little bit more of a threat on the ground, and he likes kind of riding the hot hand, so to speak.
Okay.
Based on the situation, based on where they are in the field, maybe based on the time of the game, or just and they'll swap out, series to series, and that's continued on into week 9. Just to give the defense a couple different looks. Sean Coleman, their running back, who was expected to contribute this year, but wasn't necessarily expected to be the workhorse, has really stepped into that role nicely. 141 carries, 849 yards, 7 touchdowns. He's got 3 100-yard games. He's got 2 more where he's in the 90s. Just really the most consistent offensive weapon out there. And then, again, we talked about the passing game briefly with the quarterbacks. They have some talent at wide receiver, but when your leading receiver is also your running back, that means they're throwing a lot of short balls. Jordan Neighbors is a sophomore who got a look at quarterback early on. Exceptional athlete. He has 18 catches for 236 yards. Robert Jones had a nice game last week, but they just haven't had those big plays on the outside that they're used to. So, going forward, their backbone is Coleman in the running game. They have a couple other guys that they can shift in and out of the backfield. Their offensive line is really solid. That's, talking to Coach Behrens. He's really, even though they're all juniors and sophomores, there is experience since they were so young last year. And they've done a really good job. But, I think they're going to need to find some big plays this week against a big play team in Lakeview.
Because, that's been the element that's been pretty absent, just going through and looking at how it was relative to what they had last year once Derrick Rose took over and the Sachse offense began to look a bit more like its normal self. This year, between Parker Wells and Xavier Foreman, averaging just a shade over 7 yards per pass versus 10.2 last year with Derrick Rose. So, that element of Sachse's offense has been gone. You mentioned Sean Coleman, though. He's already tripled his production from last season as he's definitely, stepped in and helped kind of shoulder that load on offense. It's just, a lot of it's going to come down to what do we make of Sachse's run defense, because when you're going up against Lakeview Centennial, that's really all that matters in containing what Lakeview brings to the table, because as we've mentioned on the podcast, they have the best running back in the country for the 2021 class in Kamar Wheaton. So that's kind of where it all starts and finishes, though, with what to expect out of Sachse, at least on the defensive side of things. How do you kind of foresee them? This is, they've got plenty of experience against Wheaton. This is going to be their 3rd time running against him and whatnot. So what is your kind of read on where Sachse's defense is, at least as far as containing the run goes?
Well, let's talk about Kamar Wheaton first, because people may look at some of Lakeview's results and they go, I don't understand some of these. They lost 33-14 to a 2-win North Mesquite team. Bertner has 1 win. They took him to overtime, but the Kamar Wheaton effect. 22 for 104, 2 touchdowns against Arlington Mesquite in the opener. Against North Mesquite, did not play. They lose. Against Bertner, did not play. They got to go scoreless.
Not only did they lose, they got blown out by North Mesquite. 33-14. They scored, they lost 7-0 or whatever it was to Berkner?
Yeah, they won the 7-0. But the fact that they were scoreless into overtime against a 1-win Berkner team. He comes back to the district opener against North Garland. He goes 19 for 86. In a game they lost, but you wonder if he was still full strength. Since then, they didn't need him against South. The game they were up 42-0 in the first quarter. But he still goes 8 for 50 with 4 touchdowns. In the big game against Wiley, who was undefeated at the time, 26 for 170, a touchdown, a 97-yard kickoff return. And then, last week against Garland, another blowout. They really didn't need him, but he still goes 8 carries for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. But you can just see the effect he has on that team. Their quarterback, Jared Adams, for the season is completing 49% of his passes. But when you have Kamar Wheaton in the backfield, last week, 9 of 13, 209 yards and 3 touchdowns.
You just have to manage the game with him.
Very efficient, though, but when the defense is so focused on one guy, that opens up everything else. And it's not just Garnett Burke, Cameron Jones, Zachariah Duncan have all, contributed in the ground game when Kamar was out. And even now that he's not, he still hasn't, except for the Wiley game, he hasn't taken on this huge workload. They're spreading the ball around. And again, they've got good athletes on the outside with Ed White, who's averaging 24.3 yards per carry. Jalen Davis, I mentioned Garnett Burke and Cameron Jones who can make plays. These guys were there the entire time. It's just, Kamar Wheaton's the guy that kind of makes it all go, and when he's there and he's healthy and the defense has to worry about him, it frees up these other guys to do what they're capable of doing, and it makes Lakeview one of the most dynamic offenses in the area, and one that's going to be A really tough matchup for Sachse. A Sachse defense that is very good against the pass, but it's alarming the fact that they're running into this matchup right now, coming off that game against North Garland, where they simply could not stop North Garland.
I was curious too, because I literally did go through game by game and just check how they fared against the lead running back in every team that they've faced, and you see early on like some really strong results. Holding guys like Capel's running back Jason Ingwu to just 64 yards. Trey Jones Scott with Plano East, one of the better running backs over in District 9-6A. He only had 72 yards on 24 carries. So there was promise early on. I don't know if it's been injuries or whatnot, but yeah, these last couple weeks with Kingsley Bennett of Naaman Forest, he broke free on them for 134 yards and just 17 carries. And then last week against North Garland, Sabron Woods with 227 yards on 38 carries. That's an insane workload. But at least in recent weeks, they've been springing some leaks up front for the Mustangs.
And it wasn't just Sabron Woods last week. He was the workhorse. Yeah. But goodness, Nwawi, I butchered that name, but he goes 11 carries for 138 yards.
Yeah.
And even Timothy Gauthier, their quarterback, was averaging over 8 yards, or almost 8 yards a carry. So they were just getting gashed. And again, they're passing. They only they allow 3 of 9 passing. Their pass defense has been good all season long, and their run defense has been good up until the last couple of weeks. And again, there's been you get to week 9, you're going to be banged up a little bit. You're going to have some injuries. But again, that was, when you look at this game 2 weeks ago, you would have been really confident in Sachse's ability to slow down Lakeview, to contain that ground game. Coming off last week, it's a legitimate concern.
For sure. And then it's not even to mention the problems that Sachse might have moving the ball again, so it's actually been a pretty stout Lakeview defense, not just this season, but last year. They were one of the better defenses overall in the Metroplex. This season they're averaging just 257.1 yards allowed. That's number 11 in the area. 18.3 points per game allowed, also number 11 in the area. They're solid in all capacities, and this is despite graduating nearly half of their defense from last year. There's still playmakers there. Guys like Garnett Burke, you mentioned earlier, Caleb Ferguson, Victor Smith, Ja'Cory Turner, or Tarver, I should say. So it's, when you look at just the results that they've produced so far in district play, and it's fair to question just to what extent Sachse is going to be able to move the ball with as much of a chore as that's been at times this season. Yeah,
and I think, a lot of those guys you mentioned, like Garnett Burke and Caleb Ferguson, are secondary guys. And, that's the area where I said Sachse needs to make a couple big plays. But first and foremost, they've got to establish Coleman in the ground game. They've got to lean on that. That offensive line, they consider it one of the strengths of the team, and that they've really got to prove it this week because again, just as we talked about the Lakeview ground game setting up everything else, if Sachse has to rely on that passing game, I just don't know. It hasn't shown the consistency to where they say, okay, fine, you shut down this, we'll just beat you here. They just, unfortunately for them so far, and who knows, they could be due for a breakout game. Parker Wells has looked really good throwing the ball at times this season. Xavier Foreman is a capable thrower, and I mentioned the talent they have on the outside. It's just they haven't done it on a consistent basis, and if you go into a game like this, you can't count on it. It just puts that much more importance on getting the run game going and establishing some balance and keeping that Lakeview offense off the field as much as you can.
It feels like a game where if either team is able to get out to a 10 to 14 point lead, that really might be all it takes, because it seems like the same sort of, the same stigma for both offenses, that neither one wants to have to throw the ball more than they have to. So I guess ultimately, how do you, ultimately see this one playing out in the end?
This is tough because, like I say, a week ago, I probably would have had a completely different prediction just based on.
Feels like a lot of that in 10-6A, where every week you power rank these 4 teams in a completely different order.
It's nuts. But I tend to think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to come down to big plays, and I know I'm going to get crap from Sachse on this, but I did.
Don't let that work.
But I did pick Lakeview based on last week. But again, I mentioned the big plays. It's not just the ability to break a 60-yard run, but special teams. Lakeview's been huge on special teams. Kamar Wheaton's had a kickoff return for a touchdown. Garnett Burke's had a kickoff return for a touchdown. They have all these skill guys with speed that in the return game, it can make such a difference, and it's such a game-changing play when you can return a kickoff for a punt for a touchdown. And when you look at it, Sachse has the potential big play potential, Lakeview has the big play proven guys, and I think that makes a difference in probably a 27-20 type game.
You wonder, you look at Sachse and just that performance against North Garland in the game that they won 24-21, but it's one that, I mean, they're probably a tad fortunate to get out of there with the victory because they got that lead in the third quarter, and then you have North Garland, which lost a fumble in the red zone on its next possession, missed a 26-yard field goal,
and then blocked. Credit to Sachse for blocking it, but
and then they turned the ball over on downs just outside the red zone in the next possession. Yeah. I mean, North Garland had every chance to try to take the lead in that one and potentially put Sachse away, and then the narrative on this game changes completely. But yeah, it really is just kind of a vote for Kamar Wheaton, and it sounds like we're talking about the likely district MVP when you look at just the balance of power that he alone can be responsible for with a team, like Lakeview, which you go over some of the early season results and just how it's night and day compared to when they have him in the lineup, and that's for a district where it feels like the talent level is relatively even across the board. I mean, when you have a transcendent player like that that's capable of swinging the balance of any game anytime he has the ball, then I got to ride with that. So,
yeah. And like we talked about too, though, we've talked about a lot about Kamar Wheaton, but if Sachse focuses all their attention on him, Lakeview's got other playmakers that we talked about that can beat you, and I just think that array of weapons is going to be really tough for Sachse to handle.
So yeah, Devin, you and I were not alone in this one, though, as surprisingly the majority of the picket line favors Lakeview Centennial to defeat Sachse. Who would have thought we'd be saying this a few years ago?
Who would have thought we had said it last week? I wouldn't have been.
Yeah. So yeah, it was you, me, Kendrick Johnson, Bryan Murphy riding with the Lakeview Centennial Patriots, and Taylor Ragland is the dissenting vote. He is staying true to the Sachse Mustangs in a game that is sure to weigh fairly heavily on the District 10 6A playoff picture. Should be a fun one. Once again, our reader-voted game of the week. Sachse versus Lakeview Centennial. This one is Thursday, 7 p.m. out at Williams Stadium in Garland. Should be a fun one. Today's podcast is brought to you by Star Local Media. 14 newspapers and websites with a print distribution of 270,000 homes and monthly page views of 600,000 online. Star Local Media, your community voice for news. And now, let's get back to the podcast. And we are back as we continue previewing some of the marquee matchups for Week 9 of high school football season. We've brought in Bryan Murphy to help out with this last part as we've broken down our game of the week, Sachse versus Lakeview Centennial. We had 4 other games, though, that were up for consideration. So let's quickly talk about those, give a few predictions, and just see kind of where we're at on some of the other big games in our coverage area. The one game that, if there was a game that was going to give Sachse Lakeview a run on the picket line, it was going to be this one. Another Thursday night contest, 7 o'clock out at McKinney ISD Stadium. McKinney North welcomes John Tyler in a meeting of 2 of the 3 remaining unbeaten teams over in 7-5A Division 1. Devin, we've talked about this fun little home stretch that we've got cooking here between John Tyler, North, and Poteet, as we will finally figure out just where the power truly lies in 7-5A Division 1. This is a rematch from last year that was won by John Tyler, albeit in a pretty dramatic fashion. North was going for a potential go-ahead score, and then they lost a fumble late in that one as John Tyler was able to hang on for the victory. The narrative has kind of changed since then. This is a John Tyler team that had a very kind of an uneven season. They started off with 0-4, and then they've since they've taken care of business with with 3 district wins, and albeit a bit of a thriller, it sounds like, against West Mesquite not too long ago. But I don't know where you're leaning on this one specifically, but it just kind of boils down to this McKinney North offense is just on a completely different level from everything else in that district right now, and given the inconsistencies that John Tyler offense showed, particularly earlier in the year, I just don't know if I trust them to keep pace with McKinney North. Kendrick Johnson, when he's on the podcast, he will, bring out the old adage.
Predicting 71-0.
Well, you got to score 40 points just to compete with North, and that North is going to they're going to get their points. Not enough. To be fair, John Tyler does have a pretty stout defense, so I don't want to completely rule out the fact that this might be a bit of a that there might be some regression in store for the Bulldogs, but I do question just how much John Tyler can truly score in this one to match pace with the Bulldogs.
And we talked before the season about John Tyler losing their starting quarterback, their top 4 rushers, and their top 4 receivers from a year ago. That's a lot of production to replace.
Exactly.
And then you start the season with games against 4 6A teams: Warren, Tyler Lee, Longview, Euless Trinity. 4 pretty good. It could be 4 playoff teams. They righted the ship again, with the start of district. But again, those young guys at the skilled positions, Cameron Ford stepping in at quarterback, he's come along. Keaton Crawford, they're outstanding. He's a defensive back and one of the top-rated defensive backs in the state.
Okay.
They shifted him over to offense last week, or 2 weeks ago since they were on their bye, and he goes 15 carries for 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that may be a budding option, as a two-way guy. But like you say, I saw McKinney North. It's just like watching a video game out there, with Dylan Markowitz and his assortment of receivers with J.J. Henry and Kendrick was telling me about, you got to watch Brandon Frazier, you got to watch. Well, Sean Mansour was their leading receiver. I mean, he went 8 for 130 last week, and he wasn't even mentioned by Kendrick at first because they have so many different options. And then you mix in Manny Fincher and Jaden Smith in kind of a backup role, still rush for almost 100 yards.
It's too many weapons.
Yeah, it's just so much for anybody to handle. It's hard to say with, John Tyler, has gotten better as district play, has gotten their 3-0. But again, they beat Texas High, they beat Wiley East, which most other teams are doing as well. Good win over West Mesquite, but I don't know if they have the offense. I think it's going to be similar to the West Mesquite game I saw a week ago, where they just have too much firepower late, and it's going to be kind of a 56-34 McKinney North win.
Yeah, and we were all unanimous in that one. The picket line was 5-0 in favor of McKinney North beating John Tyler to remain undefeated in District 7-5A Division 1. Brian, there's a fun little game going on over in 5-5A Division 1 that is Friday, 7 o'clock at Frisco ISD Memorial Stadium when Wakeland welcomes the Colony. We're finally going to get some matchups between these likely playoff teams out in 5-5A Division 1. Feels like we had to sift through a few weeks into the district schedule before we finally got to the real nitty-gritty of it all. The Colony coming off of almost just a classification altering upset that would have been last week if they had been able to take down Lone Stars. They threw the kitchen sink at the Rangers, gave them all they could handle in a 41-38 loss. Is there any concern about a potential let-up now after you come so close to taking down the number one team in the state against a Wakeland team that's going to be at full, at least a little bit closer to full strength this week, and also is clicking pretty well?
Yeah, Wakeland, they have their starting quarterback back. Dylan Leibel, he missed 4 weeks after going down in week 2 in a loss to Sulphur Springs. Albeit his backup was doing a fine job. His backup, Payne Lewis, went 3-1.
Teddy Bridgewater action there.
I don't think he uses 2 gloves like Teddy Bridgewater, but they'll use him at receiver. He caught a couple passes against Frisco Independence when I saw them last Thursday. In Wakeland they lost to Independence, but Independence is that good. It was a close game. Went down to the wire. They scored a touchdown late to make it a 2-score game. But Wakeland was in that game. They had a lead in the second half against Independence. This is a really good Wakeland team that blew out Little Elm by 40 points the week before. I don't know. I don't know what to make of the Colony right now, man. They struggle against teams that probably won't make the playoffs, and then they almost beat Lone Star. It's just I don't know. Is there gonna be a little bit of a hangover from that Lone Star game against Wakeland? I don't think so. I think the Colony is the better team. I think they're a top 3 team in this district, possibly second best team. They still have to face Independence, which is still going to be juicy. Which you kind of alluded to these 5-5A matchups getting really good down the stretch. But I'm picking the Colony to win. I don't think they'll falter off too much. I think they still just have too much firepower. But I do expect a high-scoring game, for sure.
And that's been the area of the Colony that there really has never been any questions about, is that despite the inconsistent results, they've always been able to put up points between Miles Price, Keith Miller, Christian Gonzalez, Mikey Harrington. Much like McKinney North, there's just too many weapons to keep track of just because of the different ways in which they can go about deploying those guys. I like the Colony to bounce back in this one too, although I am kind of wondering if we're looking at maybe like a 52-45 style game with as inconsistent as the Colony's defense has been, but I too like the Colony to get the W on Friday.
I have a score too. My prediction.
What you got?
45-35.
Okay.
The Colony. So
Brian, you, me, Devin, Kendrick, Taylor, we were all unanimous in this one. We all think the Colony gets the win, bounces back against Frisco Wakeland. Let's see, over in District 9-6A, I'm actually going to be at this game on Friday. We have a meeting between 2 teams that are tied for second place as part of a 3-way log jam underneath Allen in that district. Plano travels to face Jesuit. They are tied with Prosper, so we'll get a little bit of clarity on who potentially be the second best team in this district. But yeah, I mean, both the Wildcats and Rangers have amassed 3-game winning streaks over the course of the district schedule. Jesuit obviously had its snapped last week in that just blowout loss to Allen. Plano is riding it as they've picked up some pretty significant wins over McKinney and Plano East over the last couple weeks, and in victories that have certainly brightened their playoff outlook. It's two teams that, when I saw this game last year, and there's a lot of crossover between, what Jesuit and Plano had last year relative to this matchup, because, you still had E.J. Smith and Jake Taylor, as the anchors of that Jesuit offense in the backfield. And then you had Rance Holman, who was, at the time Jesuit's backup quarterback last year, but this was at a period where Kevin Schumann got hurt late in the season, and Holman got his first extensive work behind center, and he actually did start the entirety of that game against Plano. And then you had Tylen Hines, who was, in the midst of his late season surge for the Wildcats, and he actually had what was at the time his career best output with 248 yards last year against Jesuit. He eclipsed that last week against East with 261. But nevertheless, this was a game last year that Plano won pretty convincingly, 42-27. So whereas, it doesn't feel like a ton has changed 1 year later, nevertheless, we are all unanimous in going with Jesuit in this one, and I think that's more so, speaking as, someone who covers the district, Plano's defense is, I think, maybe, trended a little bit in one direction since then, and Jesuit's offense, I think, has maybe gotten a little bit better. I think I like the balance that they have at receiver a bit more. The fact that they're using EJ in a bit, I guess, different ways that they weren't using as frequently last year, and, I don't know, Plano's defense has still been a little leaky, even in victory. There was that game against McKinney where they almost blew a 28-point lead, and maybe if Mother Nature doesn't intervene, maybe they ultimately do. And then even last week against Plano East, despite a convincing, 22-point victory, Trey Jones-Scott still has almost 200 yards of offense, for what was a pretty wounded Plano East offense. So it's just a little too leaky for my liking, whereas Jesuit's defense, obviously they got, just torched by Allen last week, but that's Allen. They're going to do that to a lot of people. They still looked incredible in shutting down Prosper. And the other time that I've seen them this year against McKinney Boyd, they gave up a touchdown on the first drive, and then Boyd didn't find the end zone, on offense at least, until like the last play of the game. I mean, Jesuit does have, their defensive performance has definitely risen this year relative to what people might think after the Allen performance. I like Jesuit to come away with a win in this one. So,
and I think that Prosper game was really what sealed it for me.
Yeah.
And Plano, and again, you see him more on a week-to-week basis or a more frequent basis, but you kind of look at the results like the McKinney game or like the Plano West game, and then you look and you see for the season they're 5-2, but they've outscored their opponents 268-261, which you kind of go, wow, that's 5-2. That means that when they get beat, they get beat. Now, granted, again, they had Allen in that mix, and
then that Hebron game at the start of the year was just an absolute, just all sorts of bloodshed in that one.
But Jesuit is battle tested. I mean, not just again they took their lumps against Allen, but the big win over Prosper, and they took their lumps early against DeSoto and Arlington. But they learned from those games. They came back. I just think. With that, like you mentioned, the Jesuit defense against two outstanding running backs, but I think the Jesuit defense has enough for them to pull out a close win. Yeah.
So we were unanimous in this one. Once again, we all picked Jesuit to get the win over Plano and remain in pursuit of, at the very least, likely second place in that district. Let's see. And the last one was the Mound Showdown. Marcus at Flower Mound. This one is 7 p.m. Friday at Neil Wilson Stadium on the Flower Mound High School campus. As we talked about on Monday's podcast, the luster behind this one took a little bit of a hit with Flower Mound losing last week against Hebron, but nevertheless, Marcus can lock up the district title essentially with a win here, which for a team that missed the playoffs last season, what a turnaround that would be for the Marauders. And it's crazy because we all think they're going to get it done on Friday, because with Prosper, and not both Prosper, but with Flower Mound, it's been a case of, you have two prolific offenses in this matchup. You got Blake Short, Pierce Hudgens in that juggernaut Flower Mound group going up against Garrett Nussmeyer, J. Michael Sturdivant. I'm curious to see what the status of Tyson Edwards is in this one. He was their workhorse running back and one of the best all-around running backs in the area so far this season. He did not play last week, so I'm against Capel, and I'm kind of curious to see what his status is, because that could certainly tip the scales a little bit in this one, given what he's, this is a guy who averages 7-8 yards per carry on the regular, and is also a big big weapon in the passing game as well. So without him, it definitely does kind of lower the ceiling of that Marcus offense. With Flower Mound, though, I'm curious to see what this looks like, just because, like we talked about on Monday, they've just had a bit of a bugaboo in going up against upper echelon defenses. Now, they look fine against Louisville. They were able to get that win, albeit a win that required a game-winning touchdown with 12 seconds left, so they were perilously close to losing that one. But then you look at the performance against Prosper and just the struggles they had there. They were down, 36-0 in the first half, and then last week against Hebron, they score on their first drive, go up 8-0, and then they kick a field goal the rest of the way. Only 11 points scored, and against, again, what was probably the best defense in 6-6A. But nevertheless, though, it is kind of alarming to see that when faced with a team that can actually make them sweat a little bit on offense, that they just don't necessarily have the firepower to keep pace. Which that makes sense, that when you play better defenses, offense is going to be tougher. But to the extent that it has been for Flower Mound is a tad alarming, and I think Marcus has the defense to continue to make those hardships come to life. Looking at their effort against that same Hebron team, they beat them 24-14 the week prior. I mean, even earlier on in the season against Bowie, they lost 28-14, but outside of two massive chunk plays, when a touchdown off a turnover, that really wasn't that bad a showing by Marcus's defense against a pretty solid Bowie team. They've shown enough to where I think that they're going to be able to, slow down Flower Mound enough to get their points, whether they have Tyson Edwards or not. And I like Marcus to win the District 6-6A championship on Friday, which is not something I envisioned I'd be saying at the start of the season. I thought they were a definite bounce-back candidate, just looking at the potentially kind of how much they had stocked up the receiving core in the offseason, plus with the development of Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. He's shaping to be one of the better quarterbacks that program has ever had. I thought they were maybe a third, fourth place team, and now all of a sudden they're undefeated in districts and could very well polish off a district title on Friday.
Well, and from afar, it looks like they've learned how to win.
Oh yeah,
they've won 6 in a row since that game against Arlington Bowie. The games with Hebron, the games with Coppell, both went down to the wire. It was close, to the very end, but they found a way to do it. Which sometimes it takes a season like last year, where you're in those close games, you can't get it done. You got to learn how to win. And it looks like they kind of took those experiences from last year and have turned things around this year.
Yep, it is once again unanimous, 5-0. We all like Marcus to win the Mound Showdown, despite the fact that this would be in Flower Mound's house as well. So we'll see. It should be a fun one. These games in 6-6A rarely disappoint. They said you had a matchup last year between Marcus, undefeated, and Coppell, which is technically right now in 6th place in the district, and that game went to overtime. So that tells you all you need to know about just the parity in that district. And that is a look at some of the other marquee matchups that are on our coverage docket. As far as games that we are all covering, Devin, what you got going on Friday?
On Friday, after obviously I'll be at Sachse and Lakeview on Thursday, and another rivalry game on Friday. Big 7-5A Division I is Poteet and West Mesquite. Lockhorns are at Mesquite Memorial Stadium. Poteet looking to keep pace with the district leaders, because there's still going to be one team that's undefeated left, because McKinney North and John Tyler. And so Poteet looks to keep pace. Well, an important game for West Mesquite too, who's controls their own destiny, but certainly a win over one of the big three at this point in time would be huge toward securing that 4th playoff spot.
I will be out at Jesuit out at Postel Stadium to watch Plano take on Jesuit in that aforementioned battle between 2nd place teams in District 9 and 6A. How about you?
Devin, you better not tweet me your press box food. Yeah, Mesquite Memorial. We know Mesquite Memorial has the best food. I'll be at a FISD Memorial, Frisco Memorial Stadium, for the classic hot dog and nachos at halftime.
Tweet Devin picture of that.
You can't beat it. It's the classic at halftime for Wakeland welcoming the Colony.
Awesome, and you can follow us along on Twitter. I'm at MWelch SLM. He is at Devin Hasson. He is at Bryan Murphy _. And we'll be tweeting out updates, posting videos throughout our games, and then afterwards you can come to our website, starlocalmedia.com, to read game stories, rapid reaction podcasts, all that good stuff. And we got another fun week of high school football on the horizon, gentlemen. And that will do it for this episode of the podcast. We'll be back on Monday to break down the action from the week to come. Folks, you enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to y'all later.